My name is Julian Cade, and for 7 years I was the quiet hinge of trust at Northbridge Dynamics. My title read Chief Security Architect, but the work was broader. I designed the code signing pipeline, wrote the key ceremony playbooks, negotiated the third-party crypto licenses, and served as corporate trustee for our escrowed keys. We ran FIPS 140 to 2 Level 3 modules with a 2 of 3 quorum, minutes recorded, cameras on, seals logged. Every release image that reached a hospital, a turbine yard, a bank vault moved only because my attestations and the HSM audit trails agreed. 19 clean SOC2 cycles. 0 critical CVEs touching the signing chain. Renewal revenue of $1.2 billion hinged on that reliability and the comfort of our customers seeing the same signature, the same person, the same procedures. It looked like caution from the outside. It felt like precision from the inside. I knew where every route lived, which intermediate would roll on which quarter, which license term with Algorithmia SA required a named signatory for export compliance. I was the named signatory. The escrow agent, NCC Group, listed me as trustee with a duty to decline any release request that failed policy. The board liked that language. Legal liked that I wrote it. Sales liked that procurement never pushed back on trust. Quiet competence, measured in avoided headlines. Then the new COO arrived. Mason Reed spoke in tidy phrases about velocity and modern stacks. He smiled at my diagrams and asked why. So much of this depends on you. A consultant slide labeled single point risk with an arrow that might as well have been my badge photo. HR scheduled skip levels and an org refresh. A new VP of Platforms, Tara Voss, floated a plan to move all ceremonies to automated workflows. I watched a glass-walled room fill with sticky notes that said, decouple signatures, centralize keys, depersonalize trust. In the release review for Q3, the questions changed. Could we ship without a live ceremony if the image hash matched a pre-approved manifest? Could we delegate the trustee role? Could we standardize attestations so a director could click to approve from a dashboard? I answered in calm sentences. We could improve tooling. We could add redundancy. We could not untie the duties that customers had bought and auditors had blessed. Mason thanked me, genial as a host, and asked if I could join him for lunch on Friday to talk about the future of the function. The calendar title said, Transition. The glass room kept filling with notes. The air thinned the way it does before a storm. The lunch invite moved to 11:30 and became a conference room with glass walls and a carafe of water. Mason sat at the head. HR placed a manila folder in front of me. Legal dialed in from a muted rectangle. Tara watched the clock. Mason opened with appreciation and a vision of scale. He said our customers wanted speed. He said the board wanted resilience. He said the firm needed a structure that did not, Keyman, risk a quarter. Then he said the words that had been hovering around the sticky notes. Effective today, the signing program would move under platforms. My role would sunset. They had created a new director of compliance automation. It would report to Tara. I could interview if I wished. He paused, smiling at the idea of options that did not exist. HR slid the folder toward me. A separation agreement, a standard package, 2-month salary, and a non-disparagement clause. A second document, labeled Attestation of Continuity, asserted that the key ceremony procedures had been successfully automated, that custody of the quorum tokens had been transferred, and that ongoing trustee responsibilities were now delegated to the VP of Platforms. There was a signature line with my name. The third document was a short resignation from my trustee role, effective upon signature, to be notarized by the on-site notary waiting downstairs. I lifted the pages. The paper was warm. Someone had printed them just before I arrived. I did not raise my voice. I asked who held Token A and Token B. Tara said the new team had them. I asked for the token serials to confirm against the log. She said we could reconcile later. I asked for the ceremony minutes for the transfer. Mason said we did not need old rituals for a modern stack. I asked legal if they had read KMP 11, the key management policy, section on non-delegible duties of the trustee. The rectangle blinked. Counsel said they believed the risk was addressed by the attestation. I said belief was not a control. The room stiffened. I placed the papers back in the folder and folded my hands. I explained my role one more time, plainly. The trustee duty lives outside the org chart. The escrow agent recognizes a person, by name, verified by ID, appointed by the board, bound to the policy and to customers who bought that policy. I am that person until a successor is appointed by the same process and verified in a key ceremony that meets the standard we published and auditors tested. I cannot delegate it. The company cannot click it into existence. If I sign the attestation you drafted, it would be false. I do not sign false things. Mason's smile became a line. HR shifted to the severance language and confidentiality. I thanked them for the years. I said I would resign my employment today. I said I would notify the escrow agent of the change in control of the function, of my resignation as an employee, and of my continued trustee duty until a successor was properly installed. I said the agent would pause release ceremonies until then. No one spoke. The carafe condensed quietly in the warm room. I returned my badge. I placed 2 YubiKeys on the table with a list of their serial numbers. I kept the trustee token in my pocket. It was sealed in a tamper bag signed at the last ceremony, with my initials and those of our auditor. The custody log in the safe would match it. I cleaned my desk. I left the Frame Society report thank you from the compliance team. I signed the resignation from employment at 12:47. I walked past the glass room with its ideas about centralization. No one looked up. On the sidewalk, I sat on a bench with a notebook I had used for every ceremony and wrote the times, the names, and my next steps. Then I opened my laptop and drafted 3 notices. The first went to NCC Group, addressed to our service manager by name, citing the trust deed and Section 7.3, unusual circumstances. I notified them that control of quorum tokens had been claimed outside of policy, that I had resigned from the company, and that I remained trustee until a successor was properly installed. I requested an immediate pause on all releases and asked for an incident review call. The second notice went to our general counsel and to Mason and Tara, attaching the trust deed and the relevant sections of KMP 11 and recording my notification to escrow. The third went to Algorithmia SA and to the other 2 rights holders whose algorithm licenses required a named signatory for export control and audit. I informed them of my resignation and asked their legal teams to confirm the process for updating the named cryptographic officer. I used precise subject lines. I did not add adjectives. By the time I reached the train, my phone started to tremble. Legal asked me to recall the message to the escrow agent. They said I had caused commercial harm. They asked me to consider the team and the quarter. I thought of the board packets, where I had warned against collapsing identity into process. I thought of the night shifts when we signed hotfixes for hospital devices, and the surgeons watching the screen for a green check. I wrote back that the pause was not punishment. It was policy. It protected customers and the company. It would last until a successor was installed correctly. I said I would make myself available for the incident review and for any questions about process. I added the line I had learned to love in audit letters. This notice is not a waiver. I reached home with the folder still in my bag and an emptiness under my ribs. I brewed coffee by memory. The apartment felt like a conference room after the call ends. I opened the folder again and reread the attestation of continuity. The phrasing wanted me to become their bridge of convenience. It wanted me to say that nothing had changed when everything had. I set it aside and pulled out the binder of board resolutions that had created the trustee role. I had my copy because my name was on the resolution and because trustees keep their own record. I read until the words steadied me. The point was never my badge. The point was that someone had to be a wall. I could be that even outside the building. The incident review invite arrived from the escrow agent at 15:10. They proposed a pause on all ceremonies pending verification of quorum, custody, new role appointments, and auditor oversight. Legal accepted with a few sentences that tasted like metal. At 16:02, the release channel for the Q3 patch lit up with status updates and question marks. At 16:17, someone tagged me in the internal chat I no longer had permission to read. At 16:23, a customer success manager forwarded a note from an OEM whose change of control clause for signing authority required my countersignature for continuity until a successor was notarized. I had negotiated that clause with their counsel 2 years ago after a scare in another firm. I held the page, and for the first time that day I let myself feel the heat in my face. Not triumph, not revenge. The ache of being necessary and dismissed in the same hour. When the sun dropped, the call softened. The quiet brought the old questions. Did I overprotect? Did I become the process I defended? I let them sit. Then I opened a clean page and wrote a list. Duties to customers. Duties to the role. Duties to myself. I placed them in order. The first two would guide the next steps. The third would determine the tone. I chose calm. I chose exact language. I chose to sleep with the phone on the dresser and the binder of resolutions under my hand like a book that would not let me lie to myself. The call with the escrow agent began at 8 sharp. Priya, our service manager, read the trust deeds sections back to me like a checklist. She asked me to confirm custody of my quorum token, the serial, the tamper bag seal, the last ceremony date, and the video archive hash. I answered with a precision of muscle memory. She explained the pause they would impose. No releases until a successor trustee was appointed by a board resolution, verified in a live ceremony observed by the escrow agent and the auditor of record, with custody logs reconciled and notarized. She asked if I would agree to perform limited trustee duties during the pause for an emergency patch if a hospital or a grid operator needed a fix. I said yes, under the deed and under audit. I hung up and felt the scope of it open like a map. The injustice was not only the insult of a clean room replaced by a dashboard. It was the risk pushed onto customers who had purchased my signature as a control. I listed the contracts that would care first. Medivault's implantable device platform with its 24-hour patch clause, Faraday Turbine's field controller safety standard tied to IEC 62443, the 3 banks with PCI attestation language that name the trustee and the ceremony format, the 2 utilities with NER CCIP references that map to our signing runbook. I opened each agreement, found the change of control clauses, and highlighted the rows that required my countersignature until a successor lived in the same document. I emailed the General Counsel a packet with a quiet subject line, contractual continuity triggers and required steps. I added a cover note that offered a path, an interim ceremony program for critical security updates only, observed by the escrow agent, recorded, and reported to every OEM within 12 hours. It would not save features. It would protect lives and systems. It would preserve the quarter only by preventing a worse one. I called Miguel at Algorithmia SA, whose export license terms required a named cryptographic officer. He exhaled as if he had been waiting for my voice. He asked if the company had proposed a successor. I said they had not. He said their legal stance had not changed since we negotiated the clause. No algorithm updates, no signature verification libraries, no support, until a named successor was verified and a new manifest was filed. He promised to hold a call open for a week if Northbridge moved in good faith. I thanked him, then wrote the summary as a bullet list that legal could not misunderstand. The planning work steadied me. I built a folder labeled Day Zero. Inside it, I drafted 4 documents. The first was a trustee guidance memo, plain and clinical. Current state, pause conditions, emergency exception process, ceremony requirements, documentation artifacts, and points of contact. The second was a board brief for the audit committee chair. It explained the non-delegible nature of the trustee role, the risk to revenue, the risk to safety, and a 3-step plan. Appoint the successor by formal resolution, reconstitute custody under auditor supervision, complete a full ceremony observed by the escrow agent. The third was an affidavit of custody, a sworn statement with photos of the token, the seal, and the custody log sheet signatures. The fourth was a communication template for OEMs, a factual notice of pause, a commitment to emergency patches under supervision, and a schedule of verification steps. I left out adjectives. I included dates, times, names, and references to policy paragraphs. I also planned my position. I would not be baited into a grievance posture. I would speak only in duties. I would accept a transitional services agreement if it came, limited to trustee activities defined by the deed, paid at market rate, cancelable at will, with indemnity and fee carve-outs. I drafted the outline and sent it to Evelyn Shore, an attorney I trusted, who had guided me once through a government inquiry with a compass of ethics rather than fear. She called back within an hour. She said the documents were surgical and clean. She said to copy her on all notices involving board process. She advised me to record every call with the escrow agent and to keep my own chain of custody for the token as if I still sat in the glass room. I told her I already had. The realization that calmed me most came in a single line I wrote at the top of a yellow page. Competence is a kind of gravity. You do not need to push if you keep mass. The company had chosen speed over design. The laws of their own documents would pull them back. My task was to be visible enough to guide, quiet enough to avoid gloating, and strong enough to refuse any false shortcut. I colored 3 boxes green on the page to mark the work streams. Box 1 was governance, board resolution, trustee appointment, audit committee oversight. Box 2 was technical, custody verification, tamper seals, HSM inventory, ceremony scheduling, certificate rotation schedule, rekey plan for the next 2 quarters to remove single-person perception without loosening controls. Box 3 was commercial, license updates with Algorithmia SA and the other rights holders, OEM notifications, and negotiated commitments for emergency patches. I prepared for the incident review with a set of questions that would not fit neatly on a slide. Who moved Token B and Token C? On what date? Under whose authority? With what camera record? With which safe access log entries? With which badge scans? And which minute taker? Who ran the last build of the signing service? What hash? What manifest? What authorizations? And which witness signatures? Where was the auditor? Where was the duplicate custodian for the safe key? Where were the tamper seals? Which numbers on the bags? Which serials on the tokens? Which initials on the log? The questions were less about blame than about restoring a fabric. Every answer would either pull the thread tight or show where it had frayed. I wrote a final memo to myself, the kind that never leaves a notebook. It said, in 3 short lines, what I would not do. I would not sign continuity language written to comfort a quarter. I would not make a ceremony that was not a ceremony. I would not let anger change the timbre of my voice. Beneath it, I wrote, in 3 lines, what I would do. I would protect customers. I would protect the role. I would protect my name. Then I closed the notebook and waited for the calendar to fill, knowing that gravity already had begun its work. At 9, the incident review opened with screens full of faces that had never sat in a key ceremony. Priya from escrow moderated. Our auditor of record, Dana Holt, joined with a quiet camera and a louder checklist. Mason entered late and muted. Tara came with a project manager and a slide that said path to normal. I did not bring slides. I brought the trustee deed, KMP 11, the custody log scans, and my affidavit of custody. Priya began with the simplest question, where are the quorum tokens? Tara said tokens B and C had been transferred to platforms. Dana asked for serials. The numbers she read back did not match the log. I asked for the tamper bag seal codes. The codes did not match either. Dana asked for the safe access log. The entries showed 2 badge scans outside approved windows, no minute taker, no camera reference. The room went still, like an operating room when the monitor alarms stop because someone pulled the plug. Priya recorded the variance and imposed the pause. Mason tried to speak about intent and business necessity. Dana said controls measure facts. Priya added that if any HSM tamper bit had flipped, we would rotate certificates under auditor supervision. I watched the gravity tighten. Governance moved first. The audit committee chair, Marion Cho, called a special session for that afternoon. Evelyn joined as my counsel. I read the board brief in a voice that felt like I was reading the weather. I laid out the 3 steps in the timelines. Appoint a successor by resolution. Reconstitute custody with an observed inventory. Complete a full ceremony with escrow oversight. I described a transitional services agreement so I could perform emergency trustee duties under the deed while they stabilized. I told them what I would not sign. Marion thanked me and asked 2 questions that told me she had already read everything. Was any customer at safety risk? Could we have an emergency patch channel by tonight? I said yes, if they approved the TSA and if platforms agreed to stop any action involving tokens until the ceremony. Mason asked to separate policy from revenue and suggested we designate Tara as interim trustee by executive action. Marion reminded him the trustee lives in board resolutions, not org charts. The resolution to create a successor search committee passed in 1 sentence. The TSA went to legal for papering with indemnities and fee terms that Evelyn had drafted. Technical came next. The HSM inventory happened on camera in the escrow lab at 1410. Thales Enshield Connect XC units, serials ending 391,147 and 391,155. Tamper LEDs green on both, the audit log hashes matched the last ceremony. Token A remains sealed with bag code 0045873, exactly as recorded. My initials and our former auditors were visible. Tokens B and C, retrieved from platforms, arrived in bags with codes 0061124 and 0061125, missing the second signature. The custody log had no corresponding line. Dana called it a variance of concern. We imaged the token metadata and saw the same serials we had issued, but the chain of custody was broken. Priya recorded that the quorum would be reconstituted in the upcoming ceremony, and that any signing before then would require token A and a temporary escrow token under dual control in the lab, on camera, with a manifest approved by the emergency committee. Commercial turned when Algorithmia SA confirmed in writing that license support paused until a named successor was verified. The bank sent short letters invoking change of control clauses for signing authority. Faraday Turbine asked for a call with the audit chair. The Renewals team, now visible on a separate channel, copied Mason on everything and asked how to book Q3 without verified continuity. He replied with urgency. The letters replied with clauses. I sent legal my communication template and offered to join their calls to explain the emergency patch channel in precise terms. They accepted, relief audible in the cadence of practiced corporate voices meeting something firm enough to lean on. At 1932, the first emergency request arrived from Medivault. A vulnerability in a Bluetooth stack left a certain implantable device open to a denial of therapy in a narrow attack window. The fix was ready. The manifest hash matched the build we had pre-approved under State Route 5. The hospital deployment window opened at midnight UTC. Marion convened the emergency committee, with Priya and Dana observing. Evelyn confirmed the TSA signature via email with a simple, approved. I left my apartment with the trustee token in its sealed bag and walked into the escrow lab like I was stepping back into my own clean room. We recorded every step. Identity checks. Bag seal photographed. Signatures aligned with the log. Token A inserted by me. The temporary escrow token inserted by Priya. 2 of 3 quorum satisfied. We read the HSM event logs aloud. We verified the builder's signature, then the image hash, then the manifest hash, then the policy controls. No unsigned pre-install scripts, no debug hooks, no network backdoors. Dana called out each control with a pen, tapping the desk like a metronome. I attested. Priya attested. The HSM signed. The release artifact, posted to the emergency channel with the same signature customers had trusted for years, because that is what trust is. The hospital reported deployment success 6 minutes into the window. A surgeon texted a simple thank you through Medivault. No one in the room spoke for a moment. In parallel, the successor process moved. Platforms proposed a director I had mentored years ago, a quiet engineer named Leanne Park. She understood ceremony and never tried to make trust a toggle. Marion asked if I could brief her. I said I would, with the same neutrality I gave the auditor. The session with Leanne happened the next morning. We walked the runbook line by line, custody logs, safe key duplications, camera angles, the wording of the oath that made a person into a control. She asked how to carry the weight without becoming a bottleneck. I showed her the rekey plan that built redundancy without loosening the hinge. 3 trustees across 2 time zones, all named in the deed, with a policy that no 2 trustees could be in the same reporting line. She listened with the same exact attention that made me trust her with difficult builds in the past. When we ended, she surprised me. She apologized for what the company had done. I told her apologies were for intent, controls were for outcomes. She nodded and looked down at her notes like a person who understood the difference. Mason attempted a different path. He sent me a revised attestation of continuity, rewritten to say that I witnessed a sound transfer and that the pause could be lifted. Everything tightened in me the way a rope tightens when a load shifts. I replied with 1 sentence and an attachment. The sentence said, I cannot sign any statement that contradicts policy or observed facts. The attachment was a letter to the board documenting the token variance and the absence of minutes. Marion forwarded it to the full board without comment. Evelyn called to remind me to rest. By the 3rd day, the cadence felt like a heartbeat. Emergency patch requests funneled through the committee, sparse but real. OEMs received factual notices and schedules. Legal stopped asking me to recall messages and started asking me to review drafts. Leanne shadowed each step. The ceremony for appointing her as successor was set for Friday at 10 o'clock, to be held in the lab with Priya and Dana present, with the board resolution read aloud and recorded, with custody reconstituted, tamper seals documented, safe keys reconciled, and the oath taken. The quarter could not be saved by features. It could be saved from damage. The trust we had built began to reassemble itself under lights and numbers. As the pieces aligned, I realized something soft beneath the steel of process. This was not revenge. It was repair. The antagonist was not a person. It was the idea that trust can be clicked. Friday at 10, the lab felt like a courtroom and a chapel. The board resolution appointing Leanne Park as trustee was read aloud, each clause steady, each reference to the deed exact. Priya placed the paper in the camera cone. Dana noted the timestamp. Leanne stood across from me and repeated the oath we had written years ago to make a person, not a software role, the hinge of trust. She promised to act under policy and to refuse direction that conflicted with it. Marion asked if I would witness. I said yes because witnessing is not endorsement, it is a record. The seal on token A clicked open, my initials still clean. Tokens B and C, tainted by broken custody, were quarantined in evidence bags and logged as variances. New tokens were generated on camera, 2 of 3 quorum, random values from the module, serials recorded, custody assigned to Leanne and to a second trustee from finance, with a safe key held by audit. We verified the HSM partitions and zeroized the old certificate signing key, then generated a new CSK on unit 391,155 under the partition NB sign 02, with a fresh key label and a key store policy that required a trustee and a separate custodian for any operation. We exported the new public certificate, cross-signed it with the offline route in a session that had quiet gravity, and published the certificate to the transparency log the same hour. Every step recorded, every seal photographed, every name read into the minutes. Algorithmia SA reacted first. Miguel sent a short confirmation. License terms reinstated upon receipt of the board resolution and the ceremony minutes. The banks followed with letters that felt like pressure releasing from a pipe. Continuity recognized as of the appointment time. Faraday Turbine scheduled a call that ended with an engineering manager saying thank you in a clipped voice that sounded like someone who had slept with worry on his chest. Renewals began to unstick. Legal routed my continuity confirmation for the change of control clauses to the 6 OEMs that required my countersignature for the transition. I signed because the words were true. They did not say this was seamless, they said this was done correctly. The escrow pause lifted for normal releases at 1632, and the release channels showed a cadence that looked like a real heartbeat again. We had lost features. We had not lost the spine. Consequences arrived with the same cadence. The audit committee's incident report was clinical and sharp. It documented 2 unauthorized safe accesses, missing minutes, misidentified tamper bags, and attempted policy substitution by executive directive. It recorded the pause and the emergency plan. It recommended control improvements that mirrored the design Leanne and I had reviewed, including trustee rotation across reporting lines and a quarterly ceremony review with escrow present. It also recommended personnel action. Mason was placed on administrative leave, pending a final determination. Tara's employment ended the same day for cause, a phrase that tastes bitter even when it is correct. They had treated trust like a slider. They had moved it until the picture blurred. The board did not make a speech. They set controls and moved on. I did not allow myself triumph. Relief came in clean moments. A note from Medivolt's clinical lead that the implantable device patch had reached the last hospital in the window. A terse email from a bank that their PCI scope remained unchanged because the ceremony met the named control. An internal message from a rebuild engineer who wrote that he had never seen executives forced to read policy into a microphone, and that maybe that was the only way they would learn. Leanne sent me a photo of the new custody log with her initials, the second trustee's initials, and Dana's signature in the witness column. It was a beautiful thing in the way a straight line can be beautiful. Late that evening, Mason asked for a short private call. He wanted me to consider language for an external statement that suggested the pause had been a planned control exercise. He said optics would help sales. I let the quiet widen until the urge to fill it passed. Then I said the only optics that matter in our line of work are audit logs and signed minutes. He tried to pivot to gratitude. He said the emergency channel had saved lives. I said the deed had saved lives. He asked if I would return to lead the function. I told him I had fulfilled my duty and that a successor now held it. I suggested that he memorize the oath that Leanne had spoken and make it his own in any role he held next. He exhaled into the phone. The call ended without rancor. I wrote a note afterward, factual and short, recording the request and my reply, and sent it to Evelyn to place with the rest of the file. The TSA expired at midnight on Sunday. My last act under it was to attend a short internal forum where engineers asked about the new cadence. I answered, one more time, that trust is a design and not a feeling. You place weight in structures that hold. You do not click them. When the call ended, Leanne pinged me with a single line. We will keep it this way. I closed the laptop and sat in the quiet of my apartment with the binder of resolutions open to the page with my name. I had not been erased. The work had not been erased. It had been seen, tested, and put back into the world with a stronger seam. My victory was not their loss. My victory was that the role outlived me and the people who tried to shrink it to a checkbox. After midnight on Sunday, the lab lights dimmed and the camera cones went dark. I returned the trustee token to its sealed bag and set the binder of resolutions on my kitchen table. The city outside sounded like air after a storm, washed and a little stunned. I turned to the page that first named me trustee and traced the ink with a fingertip. That line had never been about possession. It was about duty. I closed the book and felt the room settle around a new fact. The signature that would carry the company forward was not mine. The structure that made signatures matter still was. What changed in me was not loud. I had always believed control lived in objects and steps. Seals. Minutes. Quorum. I learned something gentler and harder. Control also lives in tone. In refusing to bend words for convenience. In answering anger with the geometry of process. I saw the power of saying only what is true, of writing only what a camera can confirm, of letting the quiet weight of policy gather around errors until they cannot stand. The difference between fury and clarity is a ledger. Fury spends, clarity records. The record won. I did not need an enemy to feel complete. Mason sold speed and mistook dashboards for design. Tara renamed rigor as friction and tried to replace people with diagrams. They were not monsters. They were a story told in many rooms, the story that any person can be replaced without consequence because trust is a system, and a system is a set of screens. The consequences they met were not punishment. They were physics. A seal unlogged is a broken line. A safe opened outside a window is a variance. A trustee invented by email is no trustee at all. When policy is built well enough, it does not retaliate. It corrects. The moment that stays with me is Leanne's oath. A plain room. A paper in a cone of light. A voice promising to refuse direction that violates the deed. Ceremony is not nostalgia. It is the design of memory. It turns a person into a hinge by making the act visible and the words durable. I watched a function I had built move into new hands without losing shape. That is the dream of any architect who works without applause. To see a structure hold when you step away. If there is a moral, it is simple and it demands more than ambition. Respect the people whose names appear in your runbooks. Respect the weight of promises your customers can feel even if they never see the rooms where you keep them. Do not confuse motion with progress or a quarter with a covenant. Competence is a kind of gravity. It does not shout. It draws everything back to the truth. When the break came, I did not fight a person. I enforced the shape of the work. I protected customers, then the role, then my name. In that order, the path was straight. In that order, I could sleep. Weeks later, a hospital compliance lead sent a one-line note that read, simply, "Thank you for not compromising the ceremony." I printed it and slid it into the binder beside the board resolution that replaced me. I began advising companies that wanted the oath more than the optics. We drew new diagrams with fewer slides and more witnesses. We wrote clauses that treated continuity as a practice rather than a press release. Sometimes I was paid to show executives how to read a policy aloud without flinching. Sometimes I was asked to stand quietly in the back while a young engineer repeated words that would outlast us both. I was replaced before lunch. By dinner, the keys to $1.2 billion in renewals needed my signature. In the end, what saved the company was not leverage. It was a standard, kept by a person who refused to let his name mean convenience. They learned that trust is not a button. It is a promise made visible, kept in public, and guarded by people who know they can leave and still be faithful to the work. That is dignity. That is justice. That is enough.